So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is a map we have seen a couple of times before, an Evil Men inspired cityscape style map, and it's got these natural walls to guard the interior of the settlement here. But one of the main features about this one is the relatively open nature, with a lot of individual smaller choke points of the outer defence that the defenders are going to have to work with here. It's also a bit of an oddity in the sense that there's quite a lot of terrain that you can inexplicably hide on, which is only really useful for concealing your initial compositions really, but it also will mean that some of the armies I think will have a little bit obscured from us as we go through the compositions here, but going to be an interesting one to defend. This is also not a lore-friendly battle, unlike the Arnorian-inspired ones that we saw the last couple of weeks. This is a little bit more of a mishmash, and I think there's nothing really I can do to come up with any sort of theme with this one because of how all over the place it is, but we will see who comes out on top here, the defenders or the attackers. Again, plenty of options for both sides to utilise on the field today. But we'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost, and, well, you can see here that, just based on the fact that this is a Mordor army, rather appropriately under the command of Hidden, because most of this army is going to be hidden out here in the scrubland. But we can still see some of the army, a combination of the Uruk infantry and the Uruk halberds, the workhorse of a Mordor army. Individually speaking, they have a little bit more quality than some of the other Orc factions in terms of their ability to stay alive. They certainly are outpacing the very basic Angmarim and Misty Mountains units, or perhaps not so when you compare them to Isengard, but still decently numerous. The armour piercing of the halberds could come in handy against some defenders as well if they can get situated. Because of the more open nature of the outer reaches of the map as well, I can definitely see the thinking behind bringing the Melkor's Abominations to try and hunt down enemy cavalry units that try to escape into the open field, because that could be a real pain for the attackers to have to try and deal with if the defenders are able to do so. We also have the Temple Guard, which this kind of unit, I think especially in a siege, is you're always going to see this kind of skirmisher brought, because they're still pretty damn good in melee, not quite as good as the dedicated variants of these units for melee combat, but they can still more than hold their own. But the damage potential they have with their steel bows is very significant. There is plenty of cover for the defenders to use on this map, so we'll just have to wait and see if they're able to utilise it effectively. Moving over here, we have the Olag High. Again, not too surprised to see them because of how much of a powerhouse they can be. When you're on the attack, you know, if the defenders are in a very stubborn position and you need to try and dislodge them, and you don't want to send in your basic units because you know that they're not going to make too much in the way of progress, the damage spike that trolls can offer you is significant, and the Olag High as well have got the survivability to back it up. They're a very scary unit. Nothing really can kill them off quickly, but there are engagements in which they won't be quite as efficient. They're very expensive as well, so that is one of the reasons to be wary there. And then just over here we have the cave troll drum, well, the troll drummers, the regular troll drummers, and they're going to be banging away to keep the Mordor orcs pointing in the right direction. Now we have Gondor, so Gondor I guess has fallen to Mordor. That's the only sort of explanation you can have for 06 over here playing alongside Mordor, but still Gondor also have a much easier time of investing in these heavier archers. Again, you can see the plate armour, which means that trading back and forth is something the attackers can do. Again, this is a settlement where mileage will vary for both sides' archers depending on where the initial battles take place. If it's out in this more open terrain, then I can see the attackers having a pretty good time of it with these sorts of units. If they end up getting caught in and around those big cliff walls, it may be less of a efficient pick, but we'll see. And the armour is obviously going to help them up close as well. Speaking of which, the Gondor infantry, again the workhorse of the Gondorian army, they've got access to those cheaper armour upgrades, so that means that you can bolster them to this level a little bit more easily, and they're going to be able to take a good amount of punishment, 203 per unit. Again, they're not offensively the most gifted unit, but Gondor have got other options for that, and they're reasonably well priced for being that defensive brick that you need at the front of your army. The Fountain Guard, on the other hand, wielding these spears in an aggressive manner, they are one of Gondor's best damage dealers, so when it comes to trying to make some real progress, gain a bit of momentum for the attackers, then the Fountain Guard are going to be one of the best ways they can attempt to do that. And then a little bit further over here we have the slightly more defensive, well, much more defensive Guards of Osgiliath. You don't see the Guards of Osgiliath in a Gondor army too often, weirdly enough, but I think they're actually a pretty good addition to the Gondorian roster in this case, because it means you have that anchoring point, and they're also comparable in terms of their quality to some of those stronger Arnorian pikes as well. So a good fallback option there. The Citadel Guard with their javelins and also armor-piercing spears. We have the Fountain Guard over here, well, the shielded Fountain Guard, the Lothlorien Honor Guard. Very, very good bodyguard unit, this. Reasonably numerous. They've got that armor-piercing in melee. They are more defensively adept, so they're not the most aggressive unit of bodyguard ever, but it's a very safe place to put your general because of how defensively adept they are. Some fully upgraded Gondor spears on the flank. Pelagia Marines for some more javelins as well, and then some Axemen of Lasarnak with the upgrades as well, so a pretty good spread of the Gondorian units here, most of which we can see. There could be Athelian Rangers lurking around as well, but they can hide anywhere, even in normal terrain. The Dwarves, low bot playing as the Dwarves of Erebor, always a welcome sight for any force, whether attacking or defending in a siege because of their robust high-end quality. The Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin with that armor-piercing damage, and again that defensive edge to them as well because they're shielded and they've all got access to all that heavy dwarven armour as well. So big damage coming from them. Just in behind we do have the chariot supports in the Ironfoot Wargoat chariots. It'll be interesting to see how these guys get on in this sort of map. Again, if it takes place more on the open areas outside, I think the chariots could be really, really useful. If it's a little bit more constricted in the heart of the settlement, this is where the chariots could get bogged down more easily and ultimately killed off fairly quickly, so we'll have to wait and see what the situation is there. A couple of units of Ironfoot crossbows as well. I mean, it's always worth bringing. I mean, Erebor don't have really long range options anyway, so you need a little bit of support. Again, in sieges, if crossbows can get into a really good position, attacking or defending, can make all the difference, just like we saw in the last battle for Fornost. So yeah, good couple of units to bring. Erebor Legionaries, really good quality high-end infantry units as well, so the Dwarves obviously are going to be strong in these areas. More Wargoats as well, so they've definitely got some fast movers. Expensive endeavour as well, so we'll see if that works out. The Ironfoot Axe Throwers, good close range support, maybe easier to use than the crossbows actually, but maybe don't have the same high ceiling that the bolts do provide. A couple of Sons of Durin for that aggressive edge as well, blunt end I suppose, given the hammers that they wield. Very, very strong. The Ironfoot Pikes, probably one of the most, if not the most, efficient unit of regular pikes in the game because of the big shield value they now have. And obviously that's backed up by dwarven armour, decent mass as well, so they're going to be a little bit more difficult to bust your way through than maybe some more lightweight units from Linden, for example. But yeah, really, really strong, and generally speaking, Erebor can always fall back on this sort of unit to be effective, and considering they can't respond to long-range threats, that pike is a very, very useful thing for them to have. And then miners and Ironfoot warriors rounding off the army to give them that numbers edge as well. And finally, the last attacking force, in stark contrast, Sunlight is going to be playing as Dunland. Very much a numbers-focused faction this, but the Dunnish Warband could actually be really efficient in this sort of battle. I mean, they do double as one of the entry-level infantry units for Dunland, so that is worth bearing in mind too. Good sling, good use of the slings could be vital as the battle goes on. They brought the Dunnish Huntsmen as well, which are not terrible as far as an archer goes in terms of their damage, but they are a little bit lightweight. They won't be able to trade back and forth as easily as, for example, Gondor, but it does give them another long-range pressuring option. Just in behind, yet more pikes as well. The armour upgrade present on the Dunlanding pikemen, but needless to say they're still going to be pretty vulnerable to arrow fire, so if they can be kept safe, but also far cheaper than the likes of the Ironfoot pikes and Guards of Osgiliath that we've already seen. So swings and roundabouts, we shall see if together they can make the difference. Ravenborn Wardens, more crossbows of course. Dunland have access to this sort of unit as well, so plenty of pressure from this sort of unit coming from this side of the field alongside Erebor. Decent in melee, but again their spears a little bit more defensively orientated, so it is at long range where they're exceptional at dealing damage. Up close they're designed more to outlast what remains. And then just in behind we also have the Ravenborn with those large battle axes, big armour piercing damage from them, and more cavalry. So we've got the Dunnish Hill Riders and the mounted Ravenborn Wardens, which I can definitely see the benefit of bringing them because they've got the same sort of damage as their footbound brethren. Dunnish Hill Riders, I mean, very numerous unit of cavalry this. We'll see how well that goes for them. But moving on to the defenders, we have the Misty Mountains, played by Google Bobble, so not to be outdone in terms of numbers over here by Dunland. The Goblins will be facing off against them. Goblin infantry hidden in and amongst the Moria Halberdiers, so not an expensive front line by any means, but numerous. and it's in behind where the scarier units are. I mean, the cave troll drummers will keep the goblins pointing in the right direction, but the cave trolls and the drake broodlings are a very aggressive combination of monstrous units which can bust up a formation very, very easily, which it'll be interesting to see if that's used in a counter-attacking sense in this battle, because they can't really be used defensively, especially not the drake broodlings, so at some point they will have to go on the offensive. Snaga skirmishers are hidden in amongst the Goblin Kingsguard. They've got the stronger halberdier in the White Uruk Fearmongers here as well, and the Moria Spearguard being the backbone of most Goblin infantry forces also present. The next army along, we have the most natural ally of the Goblins, of course, in the Elves of Lothlorien, Revios playing as them. I mean, big damage, big quality as well. This is the sort of situation where Lothlorien can really be a very potent force indeed. The Kindred of Celeborn, fantastic unit of throwing axe infantry, very, very potent in melee as well. Bodyguard Tier, the Galathrim Axemen, kind of similar in the sense they have access to those throwing axes, but are also the upper end unit of regular line infantry that Lothlorien can field. Lothlorien in general have got a slightly more aggressive feel to them in melee than many of the other elves, so damage dealing capabilities, especially against forces like Dunland and Mordor, are going to be very efficient here, I think. The Dwarven armour and the Gondorian armour might be enough to buy them a little bit more time, but you're still having to deal with that elven quality that they do possess, and they've got some fantastic archers as well. Lorien archers more basic, Galathrim archers heavier, and they've also got the Guardians of Caras Galadon, one of the finest units of pikes in the game, and they've got the Galathrim nobles, so yeah, no real surprises here from Lothlorien. Bring as much of their Galathrim tier units as they can, and that'll give them a more robust feel on the front line, as well as their ability to deal damage. The goblins can make up for the lack of numbers a little bit more easily. Rhovanion, played by Ricky Beagle. I mean, this is the first... well, I mean, the Drake Broodlings technically count as well, but the Tribal Sabertooth Riders here, one of the only units of cavalry the defenders seem to have. So all of the fast movers for the attackers means they can secure the open field relatively easily, but whether or not that will be useful for taking the city centre here remains to be seen. Rhovanion nobles, 74 of them. Good unit of bodyguard tier sword and board infantry. The tribal berserkers, ever important as a damage dealing outlet in melee for the Rhovanion. They've got plenty of good, really defensive options with their heavy infantry as well. The Rhovanion phalanx will definitely be earning its pay today, I'm sure, and the tribal levy units with their litany of throwing projectiles in support. Rhovanion archers for trading back and forth. I mean, that is a good point. I mean, in terms of archers, Lothlorien have got the quality, the Rhovanion a little bit heftier. And again, positioning is going to be more key than personnel, I think, in this battle. So we'll see. And then finally, the player who sent me this battle replay, lurking just outside the settlement, but will move across pretty quickly, I'm sure. S.R. Jackson, playing as Cardolan. They've been present in a few battles lately. I mean, obviously the makeover they've got, very, very nice. Hearthguard of Amon Sul are here. Very strong unit of defensive archers. We've got the armour upgraded Tharbad Tollkeepers too. Standard Cardolan man-at-arms, so plenty of the rank and file here, along with the Greenway Footmen and the Wardens of Tir Gorthad, a morale boosting unit, always important of course for Cardolan and for the Misty Mountains as it happens, so maybe some morale issues could present themselves for the defenders, we'll have to wait and see. Ruffians for some support, Cardolan archers, but then needless to say, the crossbows are going to be a very important part of the defenders' options here as well. Cardolan bringing a couple of units of sharpshooters and the very impressive gatekeepers. Another unit of cavalry as well. I mean, this is more of a melee cavalry unit, the Dunland captains with the armour upgrade. Be an interesting battle between them and the Melkor's Abominations, but I think just in general, they might want to be a bit more conservative with them, because certainly I think in terms of fast movers, the red team still have the edge in spite of bringing a good unit of defensive cavalry like this. But I'll make a little bit of a cut, because doubtless S.R. Jackson will be moving closer to get into a defensive shape within the settlement, or at least near to it. And the red team also have got a little bit of traversal to do as they go through the outer farmlands here. So I'll make a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So we'll just rejoin here, I think, given the swarming nature of the attacks at this point. Battle could break out at any second, and the rains are falling in a rather unusual location for this kind of weather. Good mix of strengths, to be fair, in this part of the settlement as well for the defenders, as much as the Misty Mountains and the Elves of Lothlorien would never fight alongside one another, and indeed some of the Lothlorien cavalry biting off a little bit more than it can chew here, thinking that the Danish huntsmen were completely undefended, but that could not be further from the truth. Maybe getting a little bit greedy there, but you got the numbers of Dunland and the Misty Mountains against the with the quality of Erebor and Lothlorien respectively. So An interesting dynamic between the attackers and the defenders over here. The Misty Mountains can be a surprisingly awkward foe to deal with when they get dug into a defensive position, in fact, due to their monstrous units being able to lay down a pretty hefty damage spike. Meanwhile, over here, we do have Mordor fronting up over there, but much of their army is going to be going the long way round, trying to go through this very narrow choke point, admittedly, which you can cover with just a few units, but eventually the attackers could force their way through here. It's just whether or not it's efficient enough for them to really gain what they want. I mean, this is a 4v4, so the attackers can't take it as a given that they're going to be able to sustain an attack indefinitely with really heavy losses. And they're starting to creep their way forwards. The Kingsguard right on the front line as well. Danish Warband creeping their way forwards as well, but Dunland already taking some hits from the defending Elven archers up on the high ground over there, the Lothlorien archers, and the poison arrows should be pretty good against Dunland as the battle wears on, but initially the morale debuff will not be enough to convince the hill folk to flee. Goblin infantry also hiding in the hard to judge varying terrain in this section of map. Goblin infantry creeping their way forwards as well. Miners spreading themselves out a little bit more. Gondor here in the centre, very narrow for the time being and not really pressurising the frontal defences just yet. Troll Drummers still doing their thing. I mean, I think 2 units of Lothlorien archers already using their ammunition is pretty bold, but I mean, I suppose most of these are going to result in kills. I mean, the Half-Orc Axe Guard are probably worth going after as well, but they're also one of the Dunland units that can actually withstand a bit of a beating. But again, the terrain of this map, as much as it can be used to the defender's benefit with all of these ability or areas that you can hide in, it's also the same way for the attackers as well as they push their way into the scrubland. Lothlorien's quality still in close proximity here. The fight for the bridge does begin. Erebor were crossing it, and the Misty Mountains do march forward to meet them. Warrior Spearguard. The slight armour piercing they have will help them against the dwarves, but relatively low base stats means that it's not going to be enough for them to rely upon. Just in behind as well, the Snaga Skirmishers delivering the odd payload. That will be the really significant thing for the dwarves here. Javelins will be able to rack up the damage far more easily than the Goblin Spears will. So whether or not those Ironfoot crossbows can get into a good position and sideswipe the Warrior Spearguard, that would get rid of the Goblins very quickly, because they would also have the disadvantage there. Saber-Tooth Riders moving forward, maybe Erebor a little bit preoccupied with trying to support their attack over the bridge that they neglected. The advancing Saber-Tooth Riders. It is only miners for the most part that they've lost, but still, those are the sort of charges that you need to take when you're able. Several hit points on the Saber-Tooth Riders as well. A form of monstrous cavalry that has almost completely died out in the game. It might be the only example of such left. Danish Warband moving forward and engaging on the front line against the Goblins as well. It's one of those very limited situations where the Danish Warband can actually fall back on their quality against the Goblin infantry. I don't know necessarily whether they've used up all their ammunition yet. Some of the units, however, in close proximity are slings and javelins, neither of which being overly damaging, but in terms of amount of projectiles being utilised here by the attackers, that's a pretty good thing. Goblin infantry moving forward to try and get into the melee with them. Should interrupt them to a certain extent, taking damage as well from the archers further back. Karen Amroth Rangers, I mean, that is a big commitment of resources on what is ultimately a very basic unit. I think probably the regular Lothlorien archers up on this hill, I can definitely see the wisdom in using them here, but Karen Amroth Rangers, you want to be saving them for something a little bit more threatening than Danish Warband, for my money. He's mostly over on this side as well, where things have gotten underway still. Dwarves trying to join in. It's mostly the Misty Mountains as well who are taking the lead in terms of the initial units committed to the front. A few more javelins hitting their targets there, but perhaps over here, well, Mordor moving forward with huge numbers, not wanting to get caught in that choke point. I mean, this is the right way to deal with this situation, trying to force their way through this defence as quickly as they possibly can, because they don't want to get caught in a really narrow choke point against damaging berserkers and resilient pike units. And I think maybe a little bit slow on the uptake here, the defenders, seeing like Mordor telegraphed this a lot by the fact they moved most of their army around here. So the fact that the defenders were not able to lay on a bit of a thicker defence is entirely on them, really. And the tribal berserkers will do very well against a lot of these Mordor units. As soon as these Blackguard of Barad-dûr have been dealt with, the momentum will be stymied, but are they going to be able to at this point? Arrows raining down, Temple Guard arrows as well. Don't know how many of them are necessarily hitting. Trying perhaps to utilise the fire arrows to break the column of Mordor infantry, which is now bearing down upon them. The Olag High at the centre of things means, though, that you're not really going to be able to do that too easily. Cardolan men-at-arms, they're starting to send forward the kind of numbers that probably should have been there from the beginning now, but time will tell whether this does prove to be a little bit of a double-edged sword for the attackers, because they will be taking losses as they do this, but the further into the settlement they get, the more threatened the defensive position is going to be, because they are ultimately going to have to lay on a bit of a defence at ground level here as well. Now that Gondor and the rest of the Mordor army that were left over here will start to threaten the initial lines as well. Gondor spearmen will be the first, certainly not on the same level of threat as the Mordor advance, but still the fact that they are now starting to engage is going to be a concern for the defenders. It means that they will have a little bit less flexibility with reinforcing the very threatening position over there when creeping their way forwards. If anything, I would say Gondor could get away with being far more aggressive than they're currently being. See over there across the way, the Athelian Rangers shooting into the front of this Cardolan front line, but I mean the Tharbad Tollkeepers are very good at withstanding arrow fire, so maybe not the best use of them, but much of what they're going to have to now tilt their attention to. The Cardolan crossbows are the sort of thing which could very well turn this fight back around in their favour pretty fast. It's the first time in quite a while actually that we've seen such a gung-ho approach from an attacking force where they just go all in and try and force their opposition out of the way. And I don't think the defenders were expecting it either, which is why it's gotten as far as it has and why it may very well light the touch paper here for the attackers, but tribal berserkers still in behind enemy lines a bit, and the Temple Guard are still there. There's a few units left to push forward as well, but most of them are ranged support. And they do need to keep up the momentum, because the gatekeepers are now in place. Hearthguard may be less damaging, but plenty of these supporting units are going to have good shots into the Mordor army and be able to kill them off pretty quickly, at least the basic units. And that is what a lot of this force is made up of. Another unit of Cardolan men-at-arms to try and stop the unrelenting march. Is it too little too late? We'll have to wait and see. I mean, Gondor moving forward with full force as well would be the sort of thing where Cardolan and the Rhovanion would be in pretty serious trouble, I think. Gondor starting to up the ante a little bit over here. Axemen of Lasarnak should do quite well against the Hoplons. It's a little bit more comfortable for the Rhovanion units to deal with over here. Meanwhile, over here, you can see now a little bit of a role reversal at least. The Misty Mountains counter-attacking a bit and trying to force the dwarves back to good effect as well. The support from the Snaga doing nicely. If they do get escape into the open field, they could be a bit of a danger, but crossbows can also deal with them reasonably well. Dunnish Hill Riders. Lothlorien archers going after the Ravenborn in behind, a little bit of a better target perhaps. And this attack, the Misty Mountains in the ascendancy, so all of that elven support, while it may not have been used against the much strongest units, it has allowed the Misty Mountains to also have the momentum against Dunland, so things going a little bit better for the defenders over here perhaps. Getting into melee now with the Dunnish Warband. Now the Goblin infantry will last too long in this sort of melee engagement. They chase the enemy quite far. They are being harried by the Dunland Cav as well. Goblin infantry where they came from, however, the beauty of playing as the goblins. Over here, meanwhile, still trying to use those fire arrows, but still showing no signs really of slowing. Although they will do, I think, as the Blackguard of Barad-dûr are now pretty much on their last legs. And a decent amount of this Mordor force is Uruk halberds, who are certainly not designed for mass pushes. Mordor here managing to get into those Cardolan archers, and any Cardolan units that are left behind as well will rout just that little bit more easily. So that will also play into Mordor's hands. And they can now claim the high ground in their Temple Guard and start firing down into perhaps the gatekeepers. Indeed they are. A good choice, do their captains on the way over. I mean, if Mordor do escape into slightly more open terrain within the settlement, the Dunland captains charging around could be pretty damn effective. Halberds being swung to good effect. Yeah, Cardolan's morale is definitely not helping here. Probably the clearest example of Cardolan's slightly flimsier mental status that we've seen ever since the new patch released. Many of their dregs have now been sent fleeing, but again, without those great shields, it depends if they've got enough left in reserve. I mean, they are scrambling. They've been scrambling ever since Mordor really claimed the momentum over here. They've been trying to reverse the tide ever since, and Mordor using the other wing of their army to engage as well, to make sure reinforcements are not forthcoming. Goblin spearmen, guards of Osgiliath, Gondor also doing the same, pressurising more of the Cardolan units so they can't be repositioned, redeployed. Might be a situation where you need to call upon your allies elsewhere on the battlefield to commit a little bit more. Maybe Lothlorien or the Misty Mountains could commit a unit or two to try and help stem the tide, because the Rhovanion have also been on the receiving end of this, and Gondor doing a good job against them here as well. The armour piercing of those two-handed axes certainly proving to be effective. More of Gondor moving forward, though they will admittedly have less manpower in the tank than Mordor. They do bring a bit more quality to the table. Ironfoot warriors able to get in and around the formation of these Rhovanion troops a little. Try and make this as close a range battle as possible. Moving forwards as well, the Dwarven miners. Try and give them that little bit more of a leg up. Slingers. Great broodlings have been retreated again, and as the dwarves send more and more quality, I mean, yeah, goblin infantry and Snaga skirmish is definitely sacrificial against the Erebor legionaries and the advancing Ironfoot pikes. Nothing to be done there. I think maybe a general retreat would be a good idea. I mean, Dunland have taken a lot of damage, to be fair. I mean, the fact that they've been in the crosshairs of those elven archers has certainly not helped them. I mean, they're not particularly good under that sort of attention anyway because of their limited armour, but stuff like the pikes and the Ravenborn, some of Dunland's more effective tools, certainly more efficient tools, not going to do so well. Ruffians there. Landing pikemen trudging forwards also. North Rangers still with ammunition left, to be fair. I mean, basic pikes though they may be, they are still a threat, so it's not as if you're getting no value here, but you do need to be careful considering how the battle is going in other places. As much as you have done a lot of damage to Dunland, it might be other parts of the field that you need to be concerning yourself with. Starting to see evidence of the defenders starting to pull back to the inner section of the settlement as well. Tribal Berserkers maybe a little bit the opposite, engaging with these miners who are trying to slip through a gap. Falx is aloft. Infantry again managing to crunch around the formations, exploiting the weakness of, as much strong as the Rovikin phalanx are, they, like any pike, are not going to do too well when that is inflicted upon them. I mean, still Mordor are pushing forwards, and yeah, they've run out of the ability to, well, the space more than anything they've run out of to stop Mordor's push. I mean, it has cost Mordor, because this is pretty much the sum total of Mordor's army now, which is not nothing, but it is damaged nonetheless. They have forced the issue, and some of these units are not going to be able to be saved either, so that's a good bit of efficiency that they're going to be able to gain. Those Malkor's Abominations, I thought they were on their way over to recharge this position and let the rest of the Mordor army in. That's what we're about to see now. Charging across. is a situation where we could see Cardolan's morale be used against them once more. Of course, Abominations are not lance cavalry, but they will have the necessary effect. A little bit of a nudge more than a charge. Gondor swamping over another position as well from Cardolan. Yeah, the Rhovanion trying to salvage what they can. Rhovanion archers on Overwatch, firing into some of the Gondorians. Guards of Osgiliath are a good target. You don't want to be dealing with them late on. As much as you can help it, Bolg's champions will be good at dealing charges. The Ravenborn Wardens are close. Tribal Berserkers are not a unit you want to leave behind if you can help it, because of the damage they can chuck out. They'll do decently against these Ironfoots in melee, but for how long that situation is going to be allowed to continue, I'm not sure. Just in behind, Ironfoot Pikes trudging forwards as well. Ironfoot Warriors defeat, a distinct possibility indeed. The Slingers, actually again moving forward, so not all of the units are being retreated just yet. Trying to see if there are opportunities to try and get a bit more value before they do hunker down behind the walls. I mean, do decently here, as they will also convince the Raven Wardens to flee, so that might be enough for the Tribal Berserkers long term to get out of here. I mean, Mordor are in no mood to let up by the looks of things. They are continuing the assault, no rest to allow their allies to catch up. I mean, Dunland captains are here on the front line. I think more as a desperate measure, to be honest, to try and set up some sort of front line, but that is not going to be great for them given the presence of Uruk Halberds in and amongst the Mordor infantry. Drummers in and amongst the rank and file Mordor orcs as well. I mean, you have to say, I think regardless of what happens from this point on, I think Mordor's decision to do this was the right one. They've claimed a lot of map control and they clearly have the wind in their sails as a team now. I just don't think Mordor will have anything left by the end of the game. It's going to be up to their allies to try and seize the day. But Gondor and Erebor do have the quality to do so. So we shall see. Gondor spears. Guards of Osgiliath on the move forwards once more. Ravenborn Wardens attacking once more, maybe thinking of getting some rear shots into the Tribal Berserkers. Be damaging. The Ironfoots as well. Would be spared from further damage. Do they have ammunition? I mean, they should do. They've still got their crossbows drawn. They're going to settle for just surrounding them with the Pelagia Marines. Don't necessarily know how damaging that will be. Guards of Osgiliath slowly making their way forwards once more. A few dead archers on high as well. There's a lot of entry points to cover here for the defenders, but I mean, Dunland have been savaged maybe a little bit more so than some of the other attackers, and Mordor, as the other numbers heavy faction, maybe don't have as much left as you would expect either. So it will be down to quality a little bit more as the battle wears on for the attackers, but I mean, again, Ravenborn Wardens, good opportunity to get some shots into some elves, which they are taking. Archers, again, as makeshift infantry, they should do quite well. Mordor's allies do need to get a bit of a shimmy on to make sure that Mordor's continued presence on this front line is not ultimately a waste. More damage. Cardolan sharpshooters have been having to double up with crossbows. There's not actually units of great quality left over here anymore, so maybe Mordor would even take becoming a bit of a pincushion. Some javelins just in behind. High, just peering around the corner. Quick infantry heading over maybe to try and help out Gondor's advance. Ironfoot Wargoats moving forward, but Maybe a little bit clumsy there, the Bolgs champions and some infantry there to meet them, and they're not going to be able to get a charge off either. So not brilliant from their perspective, but nearly routed as well. Goes to show what a fear effect on a unit can do. Bolgs champions in this case. And there's some units getting left behind. I mean, in this case it is only tribal levy slingers, but if they still had ammunition, again, maybe a little bit wasteful from a defender's point of view, given how lost of a cause it was out here. And now the mounted saber-tooth riders, I mean, dangerous because of the hit points they have, but kind of like berserkers on horseback, and with axe throwers and Sons of Durin and Ravenborn Wardens and pikes all around them, I can't imagine they're going to last too much longer. Mordor managing to slay the Cardolan general as well. Kind of a final spit in the eye from Mordor towards Cardolan, that, because they've done very well against Cardolan so far. Cardolan may still have units left when Mordor don't, but I think Mordor's allies are ultimately going to be the ones to benefit from all of this. Gondor infantry in the front line here, they will need a little bit more support to affect any real entry into the heart of the settlement, but that can come later on. Cardolan, again, it's the Olag High is the problem. They're still very much alive, and they were one of the main beneficiaries because they weren't taking the damage of being in a static engagement for too long. They were constantly moving forwards, and now the gatekeepers usually are quite good in melee, but against the trolls, I don't know. Javelins, cause abominations. Rest of the Mordor army still hanging back. Ironically, going to be orc fodder. That may very well end up being the last of the Mordor units. Gondor just securing against the final stragglers that the defenders still have in the outer settlement. Tribal berserkers, like most berserkers of course, or all berserkers I think, locked morale, so they will have to be killed to the last man. And then they can refocus their efforts over here. Dunland moving forwards pretty quickly as well. Beastmen of Dunland kind of on their lonesome. Another berserker class unit, interestingly enough. Very potent one as well under most circumstances, but again, they will struggle if they're completely alone against a goblin formation that is this dense. Occasional javelin. Just popping overhead as well. Then Ravenborn. A few ruffians that could act as the opposite to the Snaga skirmishers in this engagement, if they can get the correct angle. And distributing some of their units as well. KARNA Rangers, who are likely out of ammunition by this point, indeed. They look to all have their two-handed blades drawn. A decent little angle of fire there into the Beastmen of Dunland. The Misty Mountains have had some pretty good and efficient engagements from their perspective. Gondor moving forward with a little bit more gusto now, more of the infantry starting to try and push forwards. It has been a bit of a scramble defence here, it feels like, trying to constantly regain their footing after the early game. The attackers' efforts may yet peter out. Neither side has got a sort of team composition which is overly numbers or quality focused. Both have got two of each, really. Or at least a mix. Well, they've done alright here. I mean, the Olag High, if they are completely isolated, then what remains of Cardolan, it is all armor piercing, so eventually it will have the desired effect. Victory, a distinct possibility for the gatekeepers. Orc javelins still looming in the background. This one of Lasarnak. Again at the forefront of Gondor's efforts. The Citadel Guard also bring their own armour piercing to bear. Again, I don't know how much of the payload the Galathrim Axemen were able to get off before they were ultimately engaged in melee, and the more of that the attackers can do, the better, because those Lothlorien throwing axes pack a real punch. even Gondor's armour will not be enough to save them from all of the damage that the elves are capable of laying out, and 1-to-1, I mean that would be an interesting throwing match between the Galadhrim Axemen and the Citadel Guard. Neither known for giving ground easily. Gondor's army still stretches back into the distance, so plenty still left to go. The dwarves also starting to move forward now, and ultimately the drummers are the only ones over here. Again, a little bit telegraphed this. It's the sort of thing which I feel like the defenders probably should have seen coming. Let's continue to do their thing. Snaga skirmishers ready to fire. Again, lowly, cheap javelins are a way of racking up a lot of value very quickly, and especially when it's Snaga getting good kills on a unit like the Sons of Durin. With the chariots now moving forward, another opportunity to make quick progress and gain more map control for the attackers, but the trolls will get in the way of that, and I think they sense that, which is why the weakest of all trolls is being committed into melee to try and stop them, but not going to suffice, although the regular cave trolls certainly would. Again, a bit of a flash in the pan, chariots, but this is the moment to commit them when the defenders are still playing whack-a-mole with their own positioning, really. So a good move that from the dwarves. Whether or not they will be able to live long enough to be truly effective, I'm not sure. Goblin King's Guard still there. Dunland, their numbers, in spite of the savaging they took earlier on, allowing them to still be useful for their team. Some of the remaining Erebor units that are still a little bit further away also there. Snaga continuing to fire away. Frame rate in this part of the settlement is a little bit peculiar. Going to use the crossbows of the chariots. I mean, the individual bolts are very potent. Cave trolls, I mean, we saw the Olaghar used to good effect earlier on. Cave trolls are greater in number, but not quite as high in terms of personal quality. Still, damage is damage. Fountain Guard, if anything, though, are going to be one of the more capable units at slaying these trolls relatively quickly. Again, Snaga skirmishers engaged in melee against some of Gondor's finest is not going to end well for the Snaga. Again, they did commit more units over here, so I think they have ultimately managed to deal with Mordor, but perhaps as expected, Mordor's actions were to the benefit of their allies, and it's this sort of chaos usually favours the attackers. Abominations also still a thorn in the side. Tribal saber-tooth riders charging across. These beastmen of Dunland have made it quite a long way, as well as these Fountain Guard. Again, more evidence of the chaos we were just speaking about.
Good tidings. The enemy general lies only half the enemy force.
Mordor's general finally falls, which is probably going to be enough to convince the rest of the lowlier units that Mordor have to flee. The saber-tooth riders are still pretty healthy, actually, so the big charges they're capable of laying down could yet prove to be vital to the defenders' continued chances. Back over here, Pelagia Marines loitering with intent. There's a few units by the looks of things that are trying to sort of set up a backs to the walls defence, which a large part of this is going to come down to whether or not these buildings work in the way that you would expect them to. Also, I mean, just hiding them away, players can easily miss a unit like that. It's not as if they stand out particularly. Usually players that are playing do have those flags that float above the units. I disable them because it, you know, looks a little bit strange in a replay setting, but you would see the flag, but it is the sort of thing which you'd be surprised people's perception sometimes blanks out when they're focused on other things. Good use of the chariots still. Karen Amroth Rangers, again, slow on the retreat perhaps. They were left up on the outer wall for a little bit too long, the Goblin King's Guard, and they're not going to be able to deal damage in return to too great an extent. Rangers going to try and do that instead. Cave Trolls, not as many of them left as you would expect, but again the Fountain Guard, Gondor's best combatants for dealing with such. And then Lothian Honour Guard finishing off the Bolgs champions. it is going to ultimately become a battle for the final stand in front of the Grand Palace at the back of KARNA. Rhovanion Nobles have also been a unit left behind, just like the Goblin Kingsguard, so another bodyguard tier unit, which is ultimately... I mean, they can retreat, to be fair, but they're already engaged, so the efficiency of doing so would probably be questionable. Perhaps not ideal. Still those Malchus abominations as well, despite the general falling, proving to be a real pain. Able to pick up those scraps where they can, although falling away very quickly. They have been active for a long time. Drake Bruling's been just taking stock of what they still have left. Heavy Goblin crossbows could be key. A couple of units of them. The bolts, the Galathrun Nobles. Plenty of Elven units still alive. I mean, if you did want anything left as a final stand unit, it would be all of Lothlorien's finest, but it is... The balance of power is even enough to the point where the attackers have clearly started to feel the strain of being this aggressive, and maybe Snow Trolls revealing themselves as well. That's a big unit, actually. Plenty of damage potential there, although the chariots there doing a good job at scything through the crossbows. With general falls, though that is significant because of the crossbows that do still remain. The chariot's able to go right down and over the other side. Again, good use. Chariots are a difficult unit to use, so that does deserve credit. Osgiliath saw them run through the Goblin General. Some Cairn Amroth Rangers that weren't able to be retreated either, going to be finished off. Rhovanion. To be fair, they will do quite well against the Thelian Rangers in melee, especially with the help of the Drake Broodlings. There's quite a few Rhovanion units still roaming around over here as well. In fact, with the Cardolan units as well, the defenders will actually win out on this side. So it is going to be entirely up to this final column. Iron for crossbows, that's big. I mean, there's not a whole lot of cover at the top of that hill, so if the angle is right, they could be a real match winner. I mean, to be fair, a lot of these units are Dunlanders, not the highest quality. These dwarves may be the key. Still a few goblins, routing admittedly. Significant portion of the army this, though, with axe throwers, who don't need to rely on the angle quite so much, and the mighty dragon slayers as well. Could be a tricky one. The armor piercing will be useful against those Lothlorien elites. Saber-tooth riders. Some good charges into the rear of these exposed marines. And then Rhovanion Nobles. Gatekeepers still alive despite the savaging that they received at the hands of the trolls. Managing to set up a wholly new organised defence. I mean, again, attackers, Gondor continuing to try and push forward even though the dwarves were lagging behind again. There's no real need for the dwarven infantry to have been that far away. If they were on hand, they could already be joining in with Gondor. Maybe keeping up with one another could be the issue that the attackers start to run into. It could even cost them the whole game, despite the overall plan, I think, being rather solid. Snow Trolls moving forward, and they will do a very good job against the remaining guards of Osgiliath. Maybe less convincing against the Lothians, but they are pretty isolated, those Gondorians. Dwarves living up to their reputation of being a little bit flat-footed. Right for pikes. Get a nice frontal charge there. The Saber-tooth riders, who have quietly built up a pretty impressive kill count for them over the course of the game, I think. That big charge bonus of theirs proving to be useful. Ruffians on the way forwards. Athel Gaxguard as well, reinforcing now. Still the Rhovanion Nobles fighting on the front, not electing to retreat their bodyguard unit, the Rhovanion. And also moving forward the Galathrun Axeman. Great Ravenborn. Again, another unit of crossbows that does still have ammunition from an attacking perspective. Worrying for the defenders. Good damage potential on them. Lothlorien nobles pushing forwards as well. Guard. Do they still have ammunition? I mean, maybe they just need a presence on the front line and that's why they're being committed. But it's a hard battle. Rhovanion nobles and gatekeepers, in spite of their slightly battered and bruised nature, are still going to have it in them to kill them off. Crossbows. Reinforcements badly needed for the attackers over here, who, yeah, this is starting to get a little bit too stretched out, really. Sons of Durin. Dragon Slayers as well. They need to be committing more of these Dwarven units forward a little bit more quickly, although maybe the time for this engagement to actually be efficient has already passed. I suppose I'm going to try and get into a position to maybe rake shots up the side of these units over here. Crossbows. I mean, are they being moved into melee? Lothlorien general falls. I mean, heavy goblin crossbows in melee are very poor, of course, but it does add to the numbers. Trading generals, that being the Gondorian one, I would suggest. Susceptible to a rout when things are really going against them. So, I mean, Lothlorien, as part of this counter-attack, they do have the Galathrin nobles down here, and this is a significant one as well, because the defenders will win this, and then they'll be able to surround the attackers, and I don't think the attackers will be able to come back from that. So despite the early progress, I mean, it does, if you're playing in that manner, it does demand a way of setting yourself up that everyone is on board with it and knows when to move, and I feel like some elements of the attacking army were a bit disparate, and this maybe calls the main weakness of that game plan into question. We've got the crossbows now being the unit which effectively being used as a rear guard. I mean, it's the only unit that they can use over here that can be used efficiently as cannon fodder at this point, the defenders. Heavy goblin crossbows, still with a bit of ammunition left as well. Any hit they get on a fully decked out dwarf going to be something that they will definitely want to do. Crossbow to crossbow, of course, the Erebor ones are better, but at this point they'll just be playing the efficiency game, I think. Heavy gobbo crossbows.
Good tidings. The enemy general lies dead.
That being the Dunland general. And again, they will be very susceptible to routing. The Beastmen maybe not, but everything else. Guard holding their ground for the moment, but I feel like that's going to change pretty much right now with the Galathrin nobles bearing down on them. Even if they don't run, they'll be just straight up killed off pretty quickly.
Our ally lies dead, slain by the enemy. We must help.
Is that the last general in play? I think so, from the Rhovanion. The Elven one's already fallen. The Dwarven one might be the only one left, now that I think of it. Dragon Slayers. I mean, the onus is on the dwarves to try and make something happen as well. Ravenborn Warden's still alive also. They still have the ability... they have spotted the units that were over here. And this is one of those buildings that you can simply march through. And the Carascaladon's Guardians getting peppered now by the Iron for axe throws, so they were eventually seen. Stealth ultimately failing them. Do they still need those pikes though? Don't know. Snow Trolls, and the Goblin Kingsguard, and yeah, these Iron for axe throwers. Defenders now very much in the ascendancy. Move over Galathrin Axeman, Kindred of Celeborn. Galathrin from archers. I mean, they could commit all of these remaining units to the fray now. The dwarves having to fight a battle on multiple fronts now, and this is where some of that quality still with those saber-tooth riders as well, getting a clattering charge into the Ravenborn Wardens. The spears will retaliate in kind, but at this point I think it's just a matter of trying to deliver a few more hefty hits, make it impossible for the attackers to salvage things from here. I mean, with Karos Galavon's Guardians still active to that extent, the Axe Throwers were never going to be able to finish them off really. And the elven quality at the centre of things, I think this is already impossible for the attackers to salvage, which, considering where the battle started, that is a turnaround. Again, that hyper-aggression, maybe if the dwarves were a little bit closer with all of this infantry support, in tandem with the Gondorians when they started to break through over here and spread throughout the interior of the settlement, it would have been a different matter. In conjunction with what remained of Dunland, that may very well have been enough. But in the end, it is not looking like that will be the case. Guardians of Karos Galadon. We didn't really see them in their usual guise here because they weren't really involved. They were just sort of hidden and only being used very late on here. Credit to the Rhovanion nobles though, resilient and have been involved in the fight for quite a while at this point, living up to their purpose quite nicely. These Galadhrim nobles as well, strong in melee. Didn't really see them at range, being used purely as an infantry unit. They are Lothlorien's best aggressive infantry unit anyway. Erebor, just one last Hail Mary up the hill. I mean, the Dragon Slayers will at least force the Kindred of Celeborn to not be completely lazy and at least get involved in the melee engagement. But this is ultimately a forlorn hope. They will not be victorious here. Crossbow's still alive as well. I mean, 2% the difference. Most of the units that remain will be very small as well. Trolls and elite elven units. The only remnant of the Obsidian Guard left being Erebor's officer units. There is the Erebor General as well, Gimli himself. Odds too great even for him to overcome here. Galadhrim. Crossbow's broken and fighting to the death, so all of the remaining Erebor units being finished off. The Beastmen of Dunland the same. Clean-up duty at this point, which leaves only the fight at the gates of the palace remaining. Erebor's finest will not go quietly into that good night. See them use too many of their throwing axes either, only in that back and forth with the Citadel Guard. Many a ranged unit we've seen more than melee prowess in this battle. Celeborn also very much count themselves among that, untouched before this recent Dwarven incursion. They're going to be able to surround them. I mean, heavy goblin crossbows are the ones that are surrounding them, so not the most threatening unit from that perspective. Gimli himself will be able to at least get a few kills against the Gobbos. And the remaining Rhovanion units trudging up the hill as well. Further afield, Galadhrim warriors. That's pretty much, I mean, them, the nobles, thing that still really remains on the low ground. So it's not as if the defenders have got a huge amount left either. The margins here are very slim. I feel as though from a defender's perspective it was mostly just the battle of survival, trying to stem the tide which the attackers had created for themselves. The battle was kind of won and then lost by the attackers, strangely enough. But this kind of battle is always a little bit strange because reacting to things is often something which is a little bit more off the cuff. Caliborn and the nobles doing their thing. Again, the armour piercing of Lothlorien also will have played its part quietly in the background. The saber-tooth rider is a bit of a standout for the Rhovanion. Final stand, not really a glorious final stand, more of a mosh pit than anything else. Misty Mountains. I mean, the Misty Mountains and Lothlorien, I guess, you know, one saber-tooth rider.
The enemy general lies dead.
And there goes Gimli.
Ride to war on a pony.
Can't even see him. Dwarves' diminutive nature being used against them, especially against the towering snow trolls. Well. Final results, 3% in the end, managing to stretch it out that extra percentage point. The defenders. Victory very much theirs. Still might be something alive over here. Most of the units that were over here, though, would be routing by now.
We
Just
are
a
victorious.
carpet of bodies.
Our soldiers have
And there we
fought
have it.
and died well today.
The defenders, despite the early game momentum being in the attackers' favour, managing to cobble together the result here. And like I said, I mean, you can see here that even though Cardolan, we saw the least of them in this battle, really, because they were kind of expunged the earliest of all of the defenders, they still got a decent amount of kills against Mordor because that sort of advance is going to be costly, but it's also the sort of thing which only really the orcs are capable of, because they do have that manpower and reserve that they can draw from, and also the high mass units that allow you to enact it in the first place. As soon as that happened, Gondor did follow suit. I think it was over on the other side, really. The Erebor dwarves needed to take more of a leading role late on and be a little bit more forthcoming with some of those units they had in reserve, because it is a high-risk, high-reward kind of plan that the attackers were working to here, and they weren't quite able to execute on it as a four in the way that they needed to. Whereas from a defending point of view, it was really just about reacting to what was in front of them as quickly and as ably as they were able to. And ultimately they did just about enough to see themselves over the line here. A good amount of enemies killed by the Rhovanion as well. I mean, let's see what did the damage for Cardolan in that grueling assault. Tharbad Tollkeepers, 226 is not bad for a unit of basic spears, but unsurprisingly it's their ranged units where they were able to shoot into that big blob, and pretty much it was their crossbows as well, getting the lion's share of the kills for the whole army, the gatekeepers and the Cardolan sharpshooters. Nothing else really performing to the kind of standard you would expect from defenders other than that unit of Tollkeepers, but it was a weird kind of battle for Cardolan to have to deal with. I mean, they could have been a little bit quicker maybe, along with their allies, to realise what was going on, but in the end, that was something which you could levy at the attackers, and it was also far more important for the attackers as well. So, there we have it. Big thank you to SR Jackson for sending this one in. Big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay, and this marks the end of the backlog for Reforged. I do have a Silmarillion replay which I might get to over the festive period as well, but trying to get through the rest of the faction overviews sort of at the end of 2024 into the beginning of 2025 is going to be the priority, I think. We'll see. I mean, the schedule is largely going to depend on what I have available to me before I go back home for Christmas. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. There will, of course, be the end-of-year channel update as well, which will be out on... Well, technically Wednesday is actually Christmas Day, but I probably won't release a video on Christmas Day. I think I'll probably do it on Christmas Eve instead. But we'll see. Things are still kind of in flux after all, end-of-year stuff at work and buying Christmas presents and all of that sort of thing, which I'm sure everyone has. So just trying to fit the channel in and around that sort of thing as best as I am able. So yeah, big thank you to all the players once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.